Hi, this is part 3 of the game prop modeling and texturing demo. Last video we talked about how to UV map our game prop, and this last video is going to talk about how to export the model, create textures, import our model back in to Maya, and then also how to upload models to Sketchfab. So we've used Maya to be able to model and UV map our pirate chest, and then we are going to export this out and use Substance Painter to be able to texture this. So we're going to create some basic textures, talk a little bit about textures, materials in Painter, and then talk about the export process and finalize our prop here. So here's our final UV map. All our UVs for our entire prop are UV mapped together. We're going to go back to my classic workspace. Turn on our grid again so we can see the location. So before we export to go texture this, we want to make sure all of our UVs are set up how we want to. We're going to select all of our objects and go Edit, Delete by Type, History. And now we're ready to export. So there are two options here. We're going to either export as an OBJ or an FBX. I'm going to drag select all of my objects and choose File, Export Selection. So I'm going to put this to the desktop and I'll create a new folder. And I'm going to call this one Pirate Chest Textures. And in that folder, I'm going to save out a file that says Chest Export. And I'm going to save this out as an OBJ or FBX. If you choose FBX file, we're going to need to go to the Geometry tab and turn on Smoothing Groups. If you choose OBJ file, those groups and smoothing are already turned on. Well, sorry, just the smoothing. We don't need the groups, but they're turned on anyway. Smoothing and normals are already turned on. So either one, OBJ or FBX. If you do FBX, make sure smoothing groups are turned on. We're going to choose Export Selection. See if there's any warnings, pay attention to those warnings, read them, correct them as you need to. Then I'm going to open up Substance Painter. So this is Substance Painter 2020. Which is a texture creation tool using procedural materials, brushes, and a bunch of other different generators and things. So I'm going to go File, New, and then within the New Project setting under the template, I'm going to change this to PBR Metallic Roughness. It should default to that, but I'm going to make sure I choose the Metallic Roughness PBR. And then beside File, I'm going to click Select and go Locate that FBX or OBJ file. There you go. So document resolution, we can keep this at 1024. If you'd like to, you can switch that up to 2048. We'll do that just for right now. Most individual props will have a texture map of a 1024 by 1024 or 2040 by 2048. But if it's an individual prop, we're probably going to stick with 1024 by 1024. So we'll just go back down to 1024. And that is a square texture map that's 1024 pixels by 1024 pixels. Normal map format is going to be DirectX, and I'm going to click OK. Alright, so on the left is my 3D version. On the right is my UV map. Kind of see how that's all going to be laid out here. Alright, so one thing I do is I go to Edit Settings, and I'm going to inverse the wheel speed. So Edit Settings, Wheel Speed, checkbox Inverse Direction. And if you're coming from Maya, the regular mouse controls with Alt and the mouse keys will be the exact same. As default, the wheel speed or wheel direction is inverted. So one thing I want to make sure is that is all my geometry imported in how I want it to. Yes, it looks like it. And then are all my UVs coming in how I want to. So the answer is yes there for that too. Alright, so this is our texture set. We're going to have one texture set, as in one material for our entire object. We can double click that and say Pirate Chest. And this is our main shader, so we have one material for our entire chest here. All pieces and parts to it on the same shader or material. So one texture set means it's going to have one base color, one normal, one roughness, and one metallic for the entire prop. So I would suggest using layers to differentiate the different types of materials that we create. So we're going to create a layer, we're going to create a mask, assign that mask to certain faces, and then making adjustments to that material on those parts of my chest. We're going to start by talking about simple materials, and then we'll move to smart materials, and then other subset things we can do to add more detail here. So we're going to start with the metal material, which is going to be the outer frame area, and then we're going to move to the wood and other smaller areas. So I'm going to create a new fill layer, which is this button right here, looks like a paint bucket. We'll create a new fill layer, and then we will say metal, so base metal. So new fill layer will create a gray swatch, which will apply that gray material to everything. But instead of a flat color, we're going to go to our materials section and start clicking on different materials. So if I click on copper pure, cobalt pure, iron brushed, that changes the material for the entire object. So with this fill material, it applies this material to everything on the object. So maybe we'll do iron powdered. It looks kind of interesting. Iron pure, iron raw. Look at some other ones. Iron grinded, galvanized, grainy. I like the iron raw. That looks kind of interesting. Okay. So with that material and layer selected, if I scroll down into the, see, I don't need my Python console right now. If I scroll down into the properties, I can change the color of that base metal. I'll add a little bit of a blue hue to it, I guess. Cool blue. There's a roughness change to it, make it more matte in finish or more shiny in finish. There's also some other settings for finish as well. There's a scale for how large that bumpy look for it is, and then detail intensity, make it more bumpy or less bumpy. So I'm going to roll it down some and then pull my scale, I don't know, medium size like that. That looks pretty good. So I can also like randomize that a little more if I wanted to. Randomizes how that's procedurally kind of patterned around, tiled around on it. This material has a color, height, rough, metal, and normal that's going to affect. Alright, so that's how we can apply a base material to an object. Well, I just want this material to affect just the metal area. So this part in the middle is going to be wood. I don't want this metal to affect those areas. So here's where a mask comes into play. I'm going to click the mask button in my layers panel and choose add white mask. I use a white mask if more of my object has this material that's needed, or I use a black mask if less than 50% of my model needs this material. So I'm going to do add white mask, which keeps the material on everything. And I'm actually going to move over here to the Polygon Fill tool, and that should show with a red wireframe. And what that will allow me to do is paint on areas that I want this material to affect or not affect. So if my color selection's 1 and I click on it, it doesn't do anything because it's a white value, which means this material is going to affect that area. If I drag that swat or that value down to 0 and click on something, it removes this material from that area. If you look at the little preview for the mask, it adds that little square there saying that this material is not going to affect that area. So I'm masking out areas of my object, polygons on the object that I don't want this material to affect. There's also a UV chunk fill, which is similar and does the same thing as a UV shell. So instead of a polygon fill, I'm going to change this to UV chunk fill. And then in the UV editor, I'm going to click and drag over the UV chunks that I don't want this material to affect. Okay. Actually, I'm going to go back to 1 because it accidentally dragged on some faces. So I'm going to drag select and add a white value, which is apply this material to everything as default. And then I'm going to go back to a value of 0 and drag select on the areas I do not want this to affect. So we'll do all of this, and this adjusts the entire UV chunk or fill. So that'll be all of these as well. That'll be all of these. Okay, so that removes that material from everything that I've drag selected there. Alright, so now if I get off of the polygon fill, now just that material is just on the metal areas that I want this to affect. Now I'm actually going to add a secondary metal material, like a different metal material, to some of the other pieces. So I'm actually going to remove this material from all of those smaller pieces as well. So basically I just want this material to be on the frame for the chest. There you go. Everything else is void of that material. Let's create a new fill layer, and we're going to call this one wood. Wood. Okay. And under the materials down at the bottom, there's some different wood materials. Okay, it looks pretty interesting. There's a wood, what's the name? Wood American, yeah, cherry, wood rough, wood walnut. Okay, that's it. So maybe we'll just do. This is a pirate ship, so I might as well do like a wooden rough one, right? Okay, so that'll give us some kind of wood pieces. Let's go into the parameters, and maybe we'll change that to more of like a brownish red. There you go. That looks pretty good. We want it to be pretty rough. We don't want it to be shiny. We don't want it to be metallic. I don't know if we can see these scratches at this point. We'll add some more detailed scratches later. I don't see it too much here. Normal intensity, so I can drag up that normal. The height range, I can drag that up a little more, so it's a little bit more bumpy. Height position, not going to do too much right now. There you go. Randomize that a little more if I wanted to. So this is a procedural wood material. That looks alright. Now we need another mask, so we're going to do a white mask. Actually, let's do a black mask, and I'll show you the opposite way. So we'll add a black mask that removes this material from everything. I'm going to get my Polygon Fill again and make sure UV chunk is selected, and then I'm going to drag select on my chunks that I want to add this back to it. Well, actually I need a value of 1. There you go. Alright, so this will just add this material back to the areas that I select. It should be all of my wooden areas. Oh, there's some down here. There you go. So that's a quick and easy way to apply material to specific areas. Alright, so there's our wood. Let's create another fill layer. Okay, so we'll just call this one small metal, for the smaller metal pieces. Alright. So let's see, silver pure, I don't know, let's see, what is that one? I don't even know what that one is. What does it say? Gold pure, brass. We'll do brass. Aluminum. I wouldn't see aluminum there, but maybe some brass pieces. It's kind of interesting. So maybe we'll change the color just a little bit. It's a little bit more darker of a color, a little bit more of a red-orange. We want this to be really shiny, really reflective. Alright, so let's add a mask to this. Let's do a black mask again. Go back to our Polygon Fill, UV chunk, value of 1. And let's add all of our small pieces to this. Which is all of these, all of those. There you go. Alright, so now I have my base bluish gray metal on my frame pieces, my wood just on the wood pieces, and my brass on just the brass pieces. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll remove the brass from the rivets. So we can also easily go in here with a let's see, black value and remove those individual pieces off. So there you go. And let's go to metal and let's add our rivets back to the metal. There you go. Here we can make some copies of this. So instead of doing that, maybe we'll make a copy of our metal. If I hold down Alt and drag on a layer, it makes a copy of that. Okay, and I'm going to remove this mask. So we'll say remove mask, and then we'll add a black mask to this, and just add those smaller little metal pieces to that. And then with our metal, maybe it's the same metal but just a darker version of that. There you go. The same metal, just darker versions of the metal. So now we have 4 materials here. That's how we can use basic materials. Now we can talk about smart materials and some other subtle detail that we can add before we export this out. So a smart material looks at the geometry, whether it's curved, more curved, less curved, closer faces together, further faces together, normal direction and angles, and then tries to apply material detail such as scratches, dents, dirt, things like that to certain areas that would naturally kind of replicate that detail. So materials or procedural materials has a lot of adjustments to them, and the goal is to add a material and make refinements to those default materials with the parameters and sliders and colors. Smart materials are a group of materials that also look at the geometry. So let's go to the Smart Materials tab. It might take a second for it to load them. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit and hover over Machinery. So Machinery is one that you can clearly see what it's going to do there from the preview. It's going to give smudge marks, dust, and in the crevices it's going to add more dirt, grime than the flat areas of the model. So let's go ahead and add that to our model. So I'm going to click from Smart Material, I'm going to click drag from Machinery and put that on top of everything. Let it process that. And we notice, well, it has a gold look to it, but it doesn't look like the preview down here. It doesn't have all that other small detail. That's because right now materials aren't looking for what the geometry looks like. So you have to tell it to do that. So over here in the properties, I'm going to drag that down, and then to the right of layers it says texture set settings. And I want to scroll down to where it says bake mesh maps. Right now there are no additional mesh maps, which means the maps that are generated from the way the geometry looks. So in the texture set settings, I'm going to click bake mesh maps. Prompt will come up. I'm going to choose the output size, and we'll match the same as what we did for the document size at 1024. And I'm not going to change anything else, just click bake selected textures. Let it run through its process. As it finishes baking these textures, which is looking at different forms of the geometry and building these individual 2D maps, and then it's going to apply that to any materials, smart materials, that are looking for these specific maps. So if you look at some of these maps over here, ambient inclusion map, ID, world space normal, curvature, position thickness, these are the maps that these smart materials are looking. If I go back to my machinery material, you can see it automatically updated that material in any subset of that material that uses any of those maps. So now my prop looks like what my smart material preview looks like. Grime and grunge, dirt, dust, and those are subsets of this machinery material. This is procedurally created through the use of images and sliders that determine where and how this dirt is clumped up in these areas and how much dirt and stuff is clumped up in the areas. So it's a really natural way to apply some of this detail. So we can unpack some of the detail in this material. I'm going to leave the base material on it for now so I can show you the contrast. But eventually I'm going to turn this off and you see that dirt and grime on top of my base materials that I created. So this is an easy way to add more visual detail. But let's go talk about the different commands here. So there's a low level dust level. I'm going to turn everything else off and just show dust. So you can kind of see there's some dust that's growing on the form here. Let me increase my transparency. There you go. So now you can see that dust. So there's the dust. It's just at a low level. And how smart materials work is there's a submaterial underneath here. There's a fill layer. There's a mask. And underneath that mask, there's a mask editor. If I click that mask editor, if I look at the properties for that mask editor, this is the dirt layer mask editor. I have a bunch of settings that I can play with. I'm going to scroll down a little bit and look at the texture maps that are used here. So these are two grunge maps. And if I pull more contrast with one, it's actually do more balance, so maybe you can see it here. If I drag my balance scale, you can kind of see how this grunge map is going to affect it more or less. If I go to the second grunge rust, kind of see how that's going to, if I drag the balance, what that's going to do. Change the contrast, what that's going to do. And each one of these has a random function. I can randomize both textures to see how that dirt is going to look. Now above that, then I can play with curvature, drag that up and down. I can play with like ambient occlusion, how it's playing with that. Position gradient, make it more dirtier if I wanted to. So smart materials are meant as a basis, but for you to then go in and refine each one of these and make it your own. So now I can come and kind of drag down that transparency more so that it adds dirt, but not, completely destroyed looking one. Dust will have a darker top edge to things because dust would settle on the top of forms. I can go into the mask for dust and the mask builder for the dust. So each one of these is different generators. So I can play with the level of how far it's growing down. Play with that, play with the contrast more, how it blends. So a bunch of things like grunge I can play with as well. So you can see grunge is kind of filling up some areas. Keep going down. There's scratches I can play with as well. There's some scratches I can add to the top of it. Scatter. Yeah, scatter as well. There's a bunch of different properties. So the idea is to take a look at all these. And maybe I don't want this much dust, so I can drag that back some. But that adds a little bit more different wear and tear to this. Okay. And the top one for machinery is rust. So yes, this could look just like rust. We can also use it for dirt and buildup and crevices and things like that. So this is default as this kind of brown color. Go down here. Here it is, metal color, brown. Kind of play around with that some. Kind of a grayish color instead. And then if I go look at the mask for rust and then the mask editor for rust, we have two grunge maps here as well, and I can randomize that. It'll randomize where those dirty spots are. It's another grunge map. I can randomize that. Then I can play with contrast. So I can say I want kind of more grunge, more balance here. Maybe this contrast is played with more as well. More balance there also, so maybe really grungy looking, dirty looking. And then each layer also has a blend-in mode, so I can play with the blended mode, maybe multiply, overlay, right? See how it changes the visuals, screen. It's kind of neat looking. Looks like it's kind of worn into it. So I'm going to put it back to normal, and then I can also have an opacity with this as well, so I can drag out like how contrasting that is. That looks kind of neat. So the idea with smart materials, and there's a bunch of different ones, is to drag one on there and play with a bunch of the parameters. I'm going to remove out the base metal because I don't need that. I want this detailed rust, dirt, dust to be applied to the top of the materials I've already created. So I don't need this metal base anymore. You can see kind of how that's going to affect my model now. I still have all of my individual detail that I just created, but now it's kind of layered on top. So whereas before I'm using this smart material, it looks okay, has different materials, but when I add to it rust, dirt, dust, other type of smart material, scratches and things like that, that's easy ways that I can add more visual detail in a procedural way. So there's a bunch of materials here. There's like a wood, ship wood that I could add, put on top of everything. See what that does? So that adds some kind of interesting vein work to the model. So maybe I'll kind of pull this on top of my metal, or top of my wood, and then let's move our metal up above everything. There you go. So there's that wood ship lap, or ship hull. And maybe let's take out the base wood. See where my base wood rough is. Yeah, those are okay. Maybe I'm going to blend this on top of what I already had. So let's do, like, lower the opacity. Maybe I'm going to come in with this one, and let's see if we can rotate it 90 degrees. So I'm just trying to show you different iterations of this. Let's go 0. And then let's do this one. I'm going to do rotate 90. There you go. So it kind of rotates everything around. Oh, wood fibers. I can't see those too well, but that's all right. So we can play around, and the wood ship one has another set of dust. There's another pattern. Oh, there's the pattern I wanted to change. We'll play around with this. So you rotate that 90. Yeah, that one doesn't seem to be doing much here. Oh, it's on a multiply. Okay. So we can keep playing around with different variations. Let's take that metal or wood and drag it down more. There you go. So the bottom one is still there. It's just not as contrasting. Okay, we'll put it down underneath the other wood and blend the top wood down. Could be something we could do. There you go. That looks kind of neat. So the idea is just to play around with different orders of how you might want this model and form to look. So we can even go to like a small little detail and see like all the little grime and dirt that's added to different areas. So that's the overall process of creating textures in Photoshop, in Substance Painter, not Photoshop. We could go to Photoshop and add more detail. We could also come in here and add just a basic paint layer on top of it. Could go get a basic brush, So like an artistic, soft. I don't know, let's go look at this dirt one. That's kind of be an interesting dirt one. If I wanted to add manual dirt, find my color. Uniform color. Let's do like a dark reddish brown. There you go. Move this up some. Go back up to the top. So when I click and drag, I'm adding like another brown layer of dirt to the entire thing. Maybe I'm going to kind of paint over some areas. Pull down the flow. Maybe we'll pull up the spacing on it. Do like jitter to randomize it more. Position jitter as well. So we're adding, stronger. Actually, let's put my flow back up so I can see it a little easier. Some more dust and dirt in areas. Kind of blending it more. Put things back a little bit there. There you go. So this is just kind of like subtle final steps that we can kind of paint on. A little dust layer or dirt layer that we're adding. Dusty on the bottom. So we add a little dust spots in areas. Okay. So something else we can do is add paint layers. So paint, dust, or dirt, whatever. But we can also start with materials and smart materials. So there's our final texture. We're ready to export things out now and take them to Maya and then also take them to Sketchfab. Alright, so to export textures, we're going to simply go up to File, Export Textures, and make sure we're going to save it to that desktop folder that we have. There you go. Select folder. We're going to do PBR metallic roughness, PNG. We shouldn't have to change any of these other ones, but list of exports, it's going to export a base color. We didn't do any emissive detail, but it's going to try to do that. A height map, we're not going to need to use that, but we are going to use a metallic, normal, and roughness. So change the setting location, look at the list of outputs as far as what it's going to save out, and then we're going to do export. Alright, so it should have exported those out. Go to our desktop. Okay, so there are textures that we just created. These are individual texture maps that will then apply back to the model in Maya or the game engine or whatever we might be doing there. Always make sure you save your substance file as well. So save as, and then we'll put it in our same folder. RHS textures and save. Alright, so I think that'll wrap up this video. We'll do a fourth video of applying things back in Maya and then also exporting and importing into Sketchfab to kind of finalize creating game props. That'll be it for this video.